This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, we're
Hey,
recording,
y'all.
everybody.
All right.
Woohoo!
So this is just to let the members know that we had a meeting recently with the lawyers for them to explain kind of the reasoning behind how we got to where we are now. And um, I know some members were questioning why we weren't going right to forming some unions and why aren't unions formed yet. So hopefully this video answers those questions.
And where we want to go.
Yeah, that's ultimately the end
Right.
big thing, isn't it?
Yep.
Um, so Jessica, who will remain just a big letter J, why, what's your big end picture thing for where this is going to go and take our industry, hopefully?
So I think for me personally, and it seems for most of the therapists that I've had the opportunity to speak with, we just want a voice. We want the coercion to stop. We want the productivity, unrealistic productivity expectations to stop. We want to be respected in our profession. We want advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
That looks like unionizing to most of us because that's what we're familiar with. But as we kind of started to research our options, it became more and more apparent to the four of us that true advocacy is what we desire. And that's something we can get to a lot quicker. The video will help explain that. Because if we have a large enough advocacy, we have a loud enough voice to persuade companies to listen to us, to persuade companies to hear us out, because unfortunately our national organizations have not been able to achieve that for whatever reasons.
And to lobby for fair practices, to lobby for rules and regulations to be fair for our patients.
Yeah. I think some therapists, I think, don't fully understand either what like ASHA, APTA, or AOTA do, because they do lobby for us. They are pro-therapy legislation, but at the same time, they're not set up to unionize for the therapists. That's not what they're designed to do. So it's although they do have a separate lobbying pack, it's they're not one or the other, although they are pro-therapy. But I think sometimes we as therapists don't feel that they do us justice with certain things, and I think that's a big part of the frustration is that they're not hearing us or care about some legitimate issues that we have. So I think that's part of the reason why we sort of started this group and say, hey, let's try to see if there's others out there who want to unionize or do something on our behalf, because it's not, we're not getting things done that we would like to see get done. I don't know. Those are sort of my initial thoughts.
And we're basically being disrespected in a field that a lot of us have put in a lot of time and finances in order to get it. And we see our wages dropping. We see our other benefits dropping, productivity decreasing, full-time jobs decreasing. We feel like we want to fight back a little bit and get some of that, which, we know is going around. A lot of it, whatever, yeah.
And I'm sure the other members feel just as strongly as we do that we feel like we're alone. We feel like we've been fighting the unrealistic productivity alone. We feel like we've been fighting the ethics issues alone, being bullied in the workplace. And so we've all kind of come here together to figure out what we can do. And I think the four of us initially thought unionize. But as we've developed in these conversations, unionizing is going to take such a long time, and we want that to be the end goal.
Right.
We
I
don't have
agree. And I do feel like I'm sorry, Jessica, but I want to make a point just on what you were saying. I do feel like we felt like we were alone, but in batches. We've all complained to our coworkers. We've all probably complained a little bit to management of when we get these new productivity standards put on us. We've been complaining about it. We just haven't had the means to act about it. And now it's time to do that.
Yeah, previously the only thing we could do was to quit or
Mhm.
wait to get fired for not meeting the
Or
standards,
just put up
or
with it, do what they
or
want.
just fall in line and do what they
Yeah.
say, even though we know it's not ethical.
Right.
I want to keep things moving, and we need to address a little bit of green elephant in the room, that our last fundraising effort, the GoFundMe, kind of fell flat.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our members were looking for a more detailed budget and what the money was going to be used for and why. $100,000, I mean, is a lot of money, no question. And where that number came from, and the lawyers do address it in the video, but I think it's important that, I mean, we went along with it. It was at the
Right.
lawyer's suggestion, but ultimately we put it out there.
Mhm.
So why $100,000? Because that's a lot of money.
Get some skin in the game.
Yeah, I mean, well, it is. I mean, that's a sizable amount you would initially think, but really it's not and wouldn't accomplish a whole lot. But
Right.
it would pay for some basic essential things to get going forward, though. You know, some people may not realize how much it's going to cost for legal counsel, drafting up paperwork, or even just somebody to do basic tasks where all this is like voluntary. We're doing everything when we can, and it takes a huge, massive effort to do, whether you try to develop a union or focus more on an advocacy group and go that route. Either way, it's going to take a lot of work and manpower, and only, you know, I mean, not everybody's going to do everything for free. Some things have to get paid for, and a lot of times, if you want things done right, it's going to have to be paid for by competent personnel.
So that's kind of how we got to this point is, you know, forming into joining existing unions, it doesn't really seem like that is the best strategy for us, because we want to advocate for things that are directly affecting therapists. So we would like to be able to create our own union eventually. The reason we recommended, and the reason that the lawyers will recommend in the video, that we start off as an advocacy is to be able to immediately go into action, to form something now, immediately, instead of, as the lawyers explained in the video, and these small unions one by one by one. So stay tuned to the video. Definitely see what the recommendations are, how we came to agree with that recommendation, and how we felt like that would help get the members what they needed immediately.
Yep.
All right. Thank you,
Well
everybody.
said.
Stay tuned.
Thank
Watch
you.
the rest of the video.
Bye, guys.
Just spent a week in Vietnam with my barber.
Well, I want to thank you both for setting up the time so that we could talk a little bit. We definitely want to have it straight from the horse's mouth, answering a couple of questions. Namely one, which I think you guys explained to us, the admins, very well when we first spoke about it, was kind of the pros and cons of jumping right into a union and going location by location versus trying to do some giant nationwide rollout versus doing some sort of nonprofit organization first to kind of meet some of our preliminary goals. So that's a whole big thing, but I'm wondering if you could break that down for people, and why you recommended what you recommended previously.
Let me kind of break it down, and let me start first on the issue of unionization. So labor relations in the United States in the private sector, and you may have members who are in the public sector and the private sector. In the public sector, they're governed by the National Labor Relations Act nationwide. We have a statutory framework that tells us who can organize and how they organize, but in virtually all cases, you are going employer by employer. And sometimes with big national employers, there is a strategic decision as to whether you try to organize nationwide, but more typically you're organizing by facility or state by state, depending on how the private sector employer is structured and how their labor relations is structured and whether there's common supervision in certain facilities. So it's a little more complicated than just deciding to unionize. In the public sector, where there is no national right to organize, the ability of public sector facilities to organize is governed by state law, and every state is different, and some states allow for collective bargaining in the public sector, and some states don't. It's about a 50-50 split. So that's a little more complicated, but in all cases, it depends on who the actual employer is. Then, as a kind of another, I'll throw this last wrench into the whole issue of unionization, is the issue of independent contractors. So there's a fairly significant body of case law that undermines the ability of people who are determined to be independent contractors by a court of competent jurisdiction to unionize because of the way our antitrust laws are structured. And it is a claim that every independent contractor is its own business entity. And by joining together to form any sort of union, it's tantamount to price fixing under the antitrust laws. It's stupid and awful, but it is being used to crush. I mean, the obvious examples have been like Uber drivers when they try to organize. I don't believe for a minute that Uber drivers are independent contractors because of Uber's control over the business model, but that is subject to determination by the courts. So organizing for the body of people that you are going to be representing really has to be done on, or unionizing on a employer by employer basis. And it's easy enough to set up a union, and it's easy enough to pick one and maybe start with a few test cases. And preferably with employers that are a little more vulnerable to our members or a little friendlier to them, if there are any. Because of the complexities of union organizing in the United States in the years of Trump, I suggested that we start first with developing a did I lose you? Okay, a non-profit organization that can act as an advocacy group on behalf of the interests of your members. There are certain common interests that you've identified to us relating to changes in Medicare and Medicaid funding and how they affect your members and your profession. You want to be able to advocate, maybe even do some lobbying and develop maybe some sample contracts if we don't pursue unionization, or if we go slowly on unionization. You want to empower your members to negotiate on their own behalf with their employers and set up kind of a common set of templates for the members to use. There are also ways of developing economies of scale on things like healthcare and insurance benefits and other things that may be of common interest to your members that usually a union contract would cover, that until we get unionization underway, you could do it as an associational opt-in for your members. So having the nonprofit doesn't undermine your ability to unionize. What it does is create a much greater platform to educate your members, to advocate for your members, and maybe do some buying of things like insurance, even professional insurance, where you might get a better deal and be able to offer those things to your members. So that's why we said set up the nonprofit first, have a governing body, connect with your members, and then make decisions about unionization, because those are going to be a lot slower and a lot more challenging. And we suggested that you're going to need a treasury. I know one of your questions was, where did I come up with $100,000? Well, I'll tell you where I came up with it. Right out of the air. I looked, I asked 20,000 people interested. I said, you should be able to get $5 from somebody to have some skin in the game, very little skin. But aside from hiring lawyers, you're going to need to hire an accountant. You're going to need to set up the nonprofit, and you're going to need to have resources to communicate and to advocate. That's short of a structure of having voluntary dues. That's separate from a union, so that people actually have to want to be a member of the organization and have some skin in the game, which I think is very important if you're going to advocate on their behalf. And those are my thoughts on that. Ryan, I don't know if you wanted to add something else.
The potential to hire an organizer as well, right? My understanding is all of you who are on the executive committee, what I call the executive committee, is there doing this on after hours or between shifts or between jobs. And, a successful organization would possibly need somebody who just does this full time for its members. And so I was thinking about buying in that. But the reality is there is no special or magic number. It's just when you look at and when you engage in advocacy on behalf of marginalized communities, workers in this case, you need money to play, period. And that's where it came from.
Great. I think that's pretty clear. A little bit of skin in the game from a lot of people.
I think you have to do that if, you have to figure out if people are serious about this or whether it's just, a phenomenon of the internet.
Yep.
Can you touch a little bit, I know you said that organizing could go quicker because unionizing is rather a slow process. Of course, we're not holding you to a timeline, but from what you have seen previously in the industry and what you guys do, what do you think the difference in time frame would be between how quickly an organization could get set up versus getting a union out to at least half the states?
I think building a voluntary organization as a nonprofit, as an advocacy group, is a very quick process. And that's why you should do it first. You need to have an identity, right? You need to be able to have a structure that people want to belong to and that choose to belong to, and create a community where you can exchange ideas and prioritize on the issues you want to address as an organization. Mm-hmm. Then what I want, if you then decide that you want to pursue unionization, then what your committee, what your governing body needs to do, if we do it through this organization, is, we'll develop the necessary tools of being able to file a petition with the National Labor Relations Board, and then identify target employers. Let's figure out where our strongest nucleus of people is. And, if our strongest nucleus of people is in South Carolina, good luck. There is an environment, right, that is helpful, right? If we do a unionizing campaign in Illinois or California or New York or Pennsylvania, we have a core labor community that we think will be supportive. And a lot of these organizations that do therapy, that do physical therapy, that do occupational therapy, they actually do business with unions, right? So I think if there's a credible organizing campaign among their workforce and we get allies within the labor community, employers are going to be less likely to be assholes in the organizing campaign. Because they don't want, you know, this is a consumer-driven industry. And so those campaigns would be probably more efficient than if we were trying to unionize a facility or an employer in the South, where the environment is not necessarily supportive. That's not to say we wouldn't do it, but I'd say what you want to do is get a couple contracts under your belt so you have the model to use in other negotiations. Now, you need to understand that if you find an employee, the way you unionize is you have to, you know, it's kind of like being a vampire. You have to be invited in, right? You don't really have to be invited in, but it's much more effective. I used to be a union organizer, and I wouldn't try to organize an employer if the workers weren't interested in it, right?
Right.
And frequently, I'd get called in by a group of workers who really weren't interested in unionizing, but they knew if I showed up, the employer would give them anything they wanted to keep me out. So I felt used and somewhat cheap, but I get it, you know, because workers are workers, right? But I think what you need to do is find a place that you start off with a strong internal group of people that want to unionize. They become your unionizing committee, right? They're the ones that have to talk to their fellow workers because, you know, we're just union goons at that point. You need to have people who know each other and are in the same struggle to coalesce. Having said that, the way the laws are in the United States, an employer can drag out a campaign for a very long time. You know, we can file a petition whenever we have a critical mass, right? So you don't need more than a third of the workforce to file a petition, but you'd be crazy to do that. I wouldn't file a petition without 70% of the workforce, because it's always going to be eroded once the pressure comes from the employer. And the way you do that is there are cards that would designate our union as the union the workers want. They sign the cards, we keep the cards, they're confidential. You then go, once you have a critical mass, you go to the employer, you say, we represent the workers at ABC facility and we want you to recognize our union. They tell you to pound sand, not necessarily as pleasantly as that. If they say they're willing to recognize us, then what happens is the cards that you've collected go to a neutral third party. They review it against the list of employees and determine that you have majority status. And once that's confirmed, then you sit down for the arduous task of negotiating a contract. If they refuse to recognize you, then you file a petition with the National Labor Relations Board and you go to an election, and there'll be a campaign period and the employer will terrorize the workers, fire some of the organizers, do all sorts of illegal activity, because that's what employers do. I mean, they're whole experts that tell them how to break the law in very interesting and effective ways. And that campaign could take a year, could take 2 years, could take 6 months, who knows? But any employer that wants to fight unionization tenaciously can drag it out. That's the sad truth about our national labor laws. And that's why it's important to be able to build alliances with other unions and other entities that might want to support the aspirations of your membership.
Thank you very much, Stuart.
Yes.
That, I think, pretty well sums it up.
Yes.
I know.
The struggles that it would come with unionizing.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you, and I'm not going to sell you a bill of goods. You know, I think every worker should have the benefit of collective bargaining and collective action, and the law protects the rights of collective action. but it's not easy. And we live in a country that has the weakest labor laws, and the consequence of that has been clearly the extraordinary income inequality that we are confronting in the jobs that you do and that the people in your community do are so important to the health and well-being of the general community. And the fact that you are treated unfairly and compelled to do your jobs in an environment that is frequently unsafe for you and unsafe for your clients is appalling. But it is the consequence of the economic structure and legal structure that we have. So, you know, if you want to take on the fight, you know, on one level, I think it's easy. On the other level, the one you really want is going to be a fight. And you've got to find a core of people who want to take on that fight. And if you do, then we'd be happy to be in the fight with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right?
All right.
No?
Yeah, while we have Ryan here, we did want to discuss with you a little bit about the trainings that were discussed previously, and how maybe we can start prepping our members for possible legal action down the road, what they should be looking for. I think you had mentioned a decision tree at one time, and I really liked that idea.
And by the way, let me just say that Ryan's approach to using the Fair Labor Standards Act and other state and federal laws to address some of the issues is really good, because you don't need a union to do that. And if you've got people who are being treated inappropriately under the law, particularly when it comes to wages and hours, you can get a much quicker resolution, typically through the litigation strategies that he has.
Yeah, so I would say I'm still in the process of building out that decision tree. The decision tree, what I would like to do is have it available on a Google spreadsheet form. So in other words, you know, you can send it out to the members can confidentially fill it out, right? Decision tree, and then it hits, and it could come to a lawyer for review. The kinds of things that we're looking for in your industry, obviously, is whistleblower stuff. We know that that's a major problem. Wage and hour violations is a major problem. And unlawful discrimination based on race, sex, age, disability are also difficult issues that I'm sure lots of your members are. Now, all of those are a little bit more complex, similar to unionization in the sense that both state and federal law apply to much of these issues. So it would be a case-by-case basis, and we'd have to do that. And that's why the decision tree is somewhat it's complicated to create, not that difficult to use.
Okay. Well, let us know if you need any information from us to help you in creating that. We're, of course, very eager to see that. All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was all we had for you today. I think that will help some key people to understand it the way that we understood it.
And look, you know, I'm happy to participate in a town hall type thing if you want a town hall. I don't know how to set it up. Somebody will.
We'll find someone else to set that up.
I use a phone, and a phone's easier and actually, quite frankly, kinder to me than a video camera. I can do either. If you have a group of committed members that want to have this conversation in a larger setting, I'm happy to do that.
Great.
We appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay, y'all. Hi. We're back, and we just wanted to discuss a little bit about what we saw in the video. We all want to form a union. We feel like that's where we're going to get our best advocacy from. That's where we'll get our collective bargaining. However, it makes sense to move forward with an advocacy group first initially to get started and work towards a union, work towards unionizing ourselves where we can in the pockets that we can, so we can grow and have a larger voice. We've all talked about it many times, and we still agree that us four do, that we would like to see an advocacy initially. What are your thoughts? We'd love to hear from you all, see what you think.
Tell us what you think. Thank you.
Thank you.